and it's 11:46, so I will call the meeting to order and ask Nicole to take roll call, please.
Blake?
Here.
Carberry Montgomery?
Here.
Kroll?
Here.
McBurney?
Here.
Obrecht?
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, item 2 is to approve the agenda. I'll ask for a motion in a second.
Move to approve Obrecht.
Obrecht. I'm sorry, who said that? Oh, Amy?
Yeah.
Okay, motion by Obrecht, second by Kroll. Discussion, roll call.
Obrecht?
Yes.
Kroll?
Yes.
Blake?
Yes.
Carberry Montgomery?
Yes.
McBurney?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, thank you. Then item 3 is to move to our regular agenda. First item is to discuss the 170th Street paving project. You saw the email from Curtis regarding this. Curtis or AJ, who's going to lead us off?
AJ is going to begin. Excuse me. First, I'll apologize if I have to start sneezing. The pollen count here is at an all-time record high, and I've been sneezing for the last 4 days, and I typically don't have that problem. So if I was back in Urbandale where it's, 42 degrees, I probably wouldn't have that issue, but I'll apologize in advance. Good morning. Nice to see all of you. As you mentioned, we have 2 items on the agenda today to talk about. The first item is on the 170th Street project. As you'll recall, at the last council meeting, we took action to continue the public hearing that was scheduled for that date because of the bids that we received. And so staff wanted time to evaluate further as to what options the council may have concerning that issue. As all of you know, 170th is a high priority project in our CIP program. And as the community continues to grow westward, the traffic along 170th or Alice's Road has built significantly. This would also include the portion of the unimproved portion of Meredith adjacent to the Fisher property that we suspended during our initial construction due to the ongoing discussions and eventual condemnation process that we went through. So we're at that point now. Oops, Matt, can you hear me? Matt, are you okay to hear now? Oh.
Sorry, I was talking to another lobbyist. If I'm talking, that's why. I apologize.
Okay, very good. I just wanted to make sure when James set me up for all this connection, I wanted to make sure it wasn't on my end so far away, but okay, very good. Anyway, so we're at that point in advance of the council meeting on April 5th that we'll have to have council take action on the bids that we received. I think at this point, and we also have got clarification on issues and items concerning how far we're able to discuss things in advance of the council taking action on this, and that was legal advice provided from the Allers firm concerning the overage. And if my memory serves me right, it's about $5.4 million over engineer's estimate. So with that, I think our notes were that well, I'll hand it off to Nikki, and she can give an explanation of the difference and the options that we have there. And oops. Go ahead, Curtis.
Curtis, are you going to run through that piece?
Yeah, I think actually what we'll do is we'll just recap some of the bullet points on this, and then it will end with just the financing options, but then ultimately request from staff for direction from the council on proceeding with the project. So with that, as AJ recapped at that last council meeting, we continued the public hearing on the consideration of bids to April 5th. And because of that, we are limited today and just discussing the project at the highest level and not discussing the particulars of the construction costs and the bids. However, in this interim, between last council meeting and the next, we do need an indication of the council's desire to proceed with the project. And as we go through this discussion today, John Larson can answer engineering questions and Nikki will help with the finance questions. The bottom line is that additional funding of approximately $4.5 million, so $4.5 million, is needed to complete the project. One question is, should we break this into phases or not do the project? And staff does not recommend postponing and rebidding the project later or phasing the project due really to two primary reasons. One, the importance of the project for safety and efficiency, and also the unpredictability of future costs. So there are essentially two options to fund the $4.5 million. The first is to add that amount to the FY23 general obligation bond issuance. And that is possible because the 170th Street project will extend into 2023. And adding that amount will have an impact on either raising the GO bond levy or cutting back on other projects in the CIP plan for 2023 or both. Another option is to use a portion of the $6.6 million in ARPA funds to fund that $4.5 million. In using the ARPA funds, if that was a choice, options would range from using none of it, and so funding everything through the GO debt issuance, or all of it, which would leave around $2 million of ARPA funds for other projects. Of course, any combination of the above sources is an option, as is using only one source, all GO or all ARPA. So there's certainly a range of options for financing. The good news is that a decision doesn't need to be made on financing today. There will be definitely more time and more information later to guide a decision on GO debt or ARPA funding. But the direction that staff needs from council is knowing that GO debt and ARPA funding, or some combination of the two, would fund that needed $4.5 million to complete the project. Does council desire staff to advance the 170th Street project this year? So that's the ultimate question that we need direction on. And I would ask John Larson, Nikki Lamb, anything you would add to these bullet points, or if not, we're ready to take questions from the mayor and city council. John or Nikki?
The only thing I would add to that is the reason we're recommending it go forward into the GO portion into fiscal 23 is because we've already had the hearings and we've already set the levy for the current year. So but it is a multi-year project, so we would be able to add that to our 23 issuance because obviously that is up and coming and we can plan for that. So that's the reason we can't do anything about it currently, because that ship has already left the port.
Thank you.
John, I don't have anything to add. As Curtis said, really, I'll delve into the bids a lot more at the public hearing. We're, again, trying to keep this at that very high level.
Thank you, John.
So, John, I'm assuming that, when I look at the bids from our last council meeting, that shortfall was 5.5 and not 4.5. I'm assuming we can discuss that at the council meeting.
Correct. Yep. Just remember, we have other entities involved in the project as well.
Yep. Thank you.
With that, Mayor and Council, are there questions that staff can address?
Nikki, can you run through how the bonding would work for next year and what choices we would have to be making next year?
Correct. So you have a couple different options. I would caveat that the CIP process will look a little different this next year if we continue to see pricing the way we're seeing it come in. You know, obviously this one came in at $90 on the construction of the concrete part. So there could be a lot of change in the CIP projects that are in the current document in 23. So I hesitate to say all we'll do is just add the difference to the cost, because currently we have 10.5 million planned in projects for the 23 issuance. That number could be significantly different even if we didn't talk about 170th Street. So with that caveat in mind, there will be a lot of shakeup in what the CIP looks like. If bids continue to be this high, we will have to kind of reshuffle and resort, and or bring it to council to say, okay, for the same 10.5 million I planned on in projects, that now cost me 14 million. Are you comfortable issuing debt for that? We absolutely have the capacity to do so. We're continuing to call and pay off bonds and allowing for that. But I'm just saying it's hard to predict exactly what that will look like, short of saying if you do not want to raise the levy, we will react to that and adjust based on what the costs are for the projects as we get closer. So that process, if you reminder, that starts late August, early September, we start pulling all that together. So we'll have the whole season worth of bids to kind of get a feel for what that looks like. I can say it's probably going to go up, even if the bids aren't 90 consistently. We've obviously seen some decent prices on smaller projects, and so I think staff can take that to heart of what do we have in the next year that we might be able to shuffle some things to still be able to do the max amount of projects that we want to do, and then some portion of it, you know, yes, if we want to use a whole 4.5 million, like I said, we're only issuing 10.5. Are you comfortable? Do you want me to go ahead and issue 15 million for another year? Worst case scenario, if all things else held the same, we may not be able to decrease the 10 cents that we would normally because of the bonds being paid off. That 10 cents may just have to be held. I don't think we would have to increase. I think it's just going to be potential that you would lose your offsetting decrease from the items we're paying off, because we're going down on the levy 10 cents every year, if you recall. That is the plan for 23. If we need to add a full $4.5 million to GO, it would be unlikely that I'd be able to give you that 10 cents. That's all I'm saying for that. I don't think we would go up in total. We just might not be able to go down. Does that help?
Okay. I'm going to kick off the part of the conversation. I think, again, I think this is a matter that we need to do this project. That's my personal. This is an important project. It's disappointing to hear what the prospects might be, but I don't, from my personal standpoint, I don't think it's a matter of not doing the project or doing the project. I'd like to hear what the council thinks.
I would agree with that. I think it's a major project that needs to be moved forward. How we fund it is up for discussion.
I agree that it's much needed. I think that for me personally, the ARPA piece is off. Just my own opinion. I don't feel like that's the best use of the funds. I'd prefer to see us go an alternative route, or at least make it one of those things that it is literally the lowest priority item on the list of things that we can do with the funds for it. So that requires us to roll it into next fiscal year's general obligation bond. Then I would prefer that. Although I know not giving a tax break next year is not going to be the most popular thing, but if that's what it takes to ensure that we get one of our more major thoroughfares up to modern standards, I think that's the preferable route to take.
Well, I'm in full support of moving forward on the project, given all of my past comments related to this project. As someone who travels this almost daily, or people in my household traveling it multiple times a day, it is an absolute safety necessity that we do this project. And you know, I guess in terms of funding, I would agree with Larry that I would lean towards pursuing the GO bond portion and not looking at at the ARPA funds for this project. But if that's not a decision we have to make now, then we don't have to make it now. So, but my preference or my vote, whatever, is to definitely move forward on this project because of its importance in the traffic patterns in the western part of our community.
I'll try to keep it short because I don't know what gets through in here. Moving forward, prefer not to use ARPA.
And for me, yeah, moving forward, I guess I'm not seeing the downside of using ARPA, since basically ARPA is just a toss into the GEO pot. And then we can figure out if we want to do bonding next year for other projects that would have been funded with ARPA. So but I think that financing piece is a future discussion item for us.
Right. And, you know, if it's any consolation from what I'm hearing from other cities, from mayors, we had some discussion about this at the last mayor's. Everybody's seeing similar items. So it's, you know, it's just a matter of, I think it's a reality for us that we're going to have to deal with. So it's nothing unique. No pun intended, nothing unique to Urbandale, but it's something that we're going to have to live with, and we're going to have to factor this into how we budget and how we look at future CIP projects. I think at least for the foreseeable future. So.
I think that's helpful. AJ, John, Nikki, any additional comments or questions for the council?
No, I think that gives me the direction I need for getting ready for the next council meeting.
Okay.
I was just going to say, I think we're clear direction that the project is a priority to still accomplish. Just a bit of history. You'll remember probably 5 years ago, we were in the same boat where concrete shot up during mid-time, and the council had to jettison 2 projects that they had planned and held them over to the next fiscal year or next construction season because of unanticipated cost increase, and I think it was in concrete at that time. So this isn't unprecedented for us to deal with, but certainly, as the mayor mentioned about his contacts, I was at a recent meeting with city managers, and they were all bemoaning the same situation: the uncertainty of the construction environment, the pricing for lots of different products that go into the construction activity, and especially the big projects, as John will attest to, is that we're getting contractors to bid on the smaller projects, $1 million to $2 million. There's plenty of those folks, and the prices are still competitive. The larger projects, such as this, because this was planned, as you remember, this is a 2-year project from the get-go. So it's a big project. And contractors that can handle that project in that time frame, they're becoming a little less available.
There are just a lot of dollars chasing projects right now. And that's what you're seeing. So.
I think it's a great point, Mr. Mayor, because Nikki and I spoke about this. When you think about the growth in the metro, you think about those communities that are choosing to use ARPA, the monies that will be filtering down through the highway construction programs that was passed recently. There's a lot of cash out there, and communities are willing to spend, and so contractors have their choice, and they will look at the projects that fit their schedule, their manpower, their mobilization opportunities. So it's a contractor's market right now.
All right. Any further discussion on that? All right. Well, I think, again, as we said, I think John and Nikki, I think you have the council's direction on that, and we will proceed forward. So thank you for that. Then we'll move on to item 3.2, and that's to discuss the distribution of the ARPA funding.
Excellent. Thank you. And John Conyer is going to pull up a slide deck here to walk through. I'm trying to resolve a technical issue with Nicole in the council chambers. I'm going to exit the meeting and come back in, but John, please lead the way on this. We had you for a moment, John, and now it's gone.
You had me for a moment, except I forgot to unmute myself, and I couldn't do that when I started to share the screen. So I'm going to go back and share my screen now that I am unmuted.
Sounds good.
You should all hopefully see an ARPA pathway. Excellent. So this is, staff had said that we would come back to council and talk about what are the next steps for a decision on ARPA funding. And so this is our take on it, and it's called an ARPA pathway, and it's hopefully to lay you out a 7-point path to get to where you would like to get to make a decision on how it's best to spend ARPA funding to support our response and recovery from COVID-19. The first slide here, the final rule, I'm going to turn over to Nikki Lamb to kind of walk through this slide and what she's learned from her most recent seminars on the ARPA funding piece. So Nikki, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, John. So just wanted to kind of bring you up to speed. The final rule did come out, finally. It actually takes effect April 1st of 22, and the categories that are listed there did not change. So we still have categories 1 through 4, and similar to what we said in the previous, I can't even remember when we did that update, February-ish, that John had come out with that prelim set of slide decks. The public sector loss revenue, that was one that we had not previously thought we would qualify for, but the final rules came out with a $10 million allowance. So kind of think of it as your standard deduction for the IRS. They don't care what your actual expenses are, or in this case, actual revenue is. They're going to assume every government had $10 million in revenue loss. So up to that 10 million. Now, our award is obviously only 6.6 million. It does not increase our award. We still have just the 6.6 million. But this category 3 provides the most flexibility for a government to use it for any ongoing city operations. So anything we currently do, you can use this money to help pay for anything above our current budget. So we still obviously have category 4, which for us was going to be the storm sewer projects that made the most sense for us. So there's still only those 2 categories that we qualify in. Based on all of the information we're seeing, it kind of feels like the federal government just really, really wants to make this now as easy as possible. Even if you're going to spend money on infrastructure, they're still saying put it under category 3. If you're an under $10 million allowance limit, so some entities, got millions and millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, they're going to have to go through something else. But those of us that are in the under $10 million award, use category 3. It's the easiest and most straightforward. And we can still do things that are in category 4 because obviously we were doing those items anyway, that you can still do it all under the lost revenue category of number 3. So that is our recommendation, is to go ahead and pick category 3 as our public revenue loss category. The reason this is important that we need to bring it up right now is because our first report is due April 30th, and this April 30th report is the one time we have to elect. Are we going to use the standard allowance, or are we going to use the calculation? And if it's a one and done, we can't change our mind. Most everybody is going to use that. We wouldn't be eligible if we wanted to use the calculation because we didn't actually lose revenue because of local option sales tax coming in. It's an aggregate approach. So if we want to do it, we do need to elect that on April 30th, and then it allows us to actually make the decisions on what do we want to spend it on, which is what Curtis and John are going to go through here next. But the key point decision number 1 is, are you comfortable with us picking category 3 to use our $6.6 million in the loss of revenue category, which means you can still decide over the next couple of months, what do you want to spend that on? What categories do you want to spend it on? It's not a decision deadline as far as if we file it at this time, you have to know what you're going to spend it on. It's not that at all. We just have to make a one-time election on this April 30 report that says you are going to use the allowance option. So that's our internal discussion today, similar to what we just said about 170th, the weeds are still coming. This is high level. Do you want us to go ahead and file it that way? Our decision deadline that's mentioned there, the 7/1. So this is our internal discussion of, we need to start deciding on projects, and we want to help you get there. And that's what the rest of this session today is going to be about, of what steps are we, it's baby steps to get there. There's a lot to decide, but we need to get that ball rolling, mostly because yes, we have till 2024, but a lot of these projects are going to take some time to get organized. So we want to try to actively move forward here before the new fiscal year to have decisions made so that we can start actively pursuing those. But backing up to that, step 1 discussion item here is, are you okay with us putting on April 30th to use category 3? And we actually would probably like that discussion to go ahead and happen before we even move on to the next slide, because that is going to affect the whole rest of the presentation.
It would change radically.
Yes.
I will be the first to say that I think that that's a good idea. We should just go ahead and move forward with category 3 and claim that standardized amount.
This is Amy. I agree.
Okay.
Category.
I agree.
That's 3.
Bridget, you got a thumbs up?
Sorry, we're in presentation mode. I can't see everybody.
Yep, sounds good.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think it would be well.
It gives us the most flexibility. You can still do literally anything in the other category that you could have done. If you decide you want to do construction projects, we can still do it. It just falls under allowance. It allows us to do it there too. So it's just the best flexibility, and I think that they're just really pushing all of us to try to use as much of it as possible in that area so that the funds can actually start getting spent. Exactly what we just talked about on 170th, that's happening throughout the country. The funds are available and nobody can get contractors because the prices are going up. It's a contractor's market. So I think they're trying to push to get some of this the funds out on the street in other ways. So that was our recommendation. Sounds like we are in approval for that. So John and I will move forward with that with the April 30th filing. That's the end of my slide, and I will turn that back over. I think, John, are you taking this one?
I believe I'm taking this one. Curtis, is this me or you? It's me, it looks like. Okay. Yes, and so the pathway to move now on to step 2 that we've made the decision to use the lost revenue piece of it is AJ collected from the mayor, council, and from staff here what are ideas to use the ARPA funds for. And there were over 65 ideas that have come in so far, and I'm sure there will be more as we all discuss this and you all discuss this moving between now and the 1st of July, when we actually hope to make a decision on what are the projects and or programs that we would like to use our ARPA funding for. Step 3, looking at the 65 plus things that came in, we decided to group them in categories. And this was to try to put similar things together. The categories laid out here are 6 that were used by Des Moines as well as other National League of Cities participants that have gone out and surveyed their residents to find out. They usually group them in categories, putting like things together, apples to apples. And so the 6 of them here, city facilities and services, community contributions, enterprise infrastructure is really water, sewer, and broadband. Roadway would also include trails and complete streets. Social and environmental would be anything from solar to EVs to residential programs for housing. And quality of life things would be social programs and parks and rec, kind of the general overview. The next page is some of the suggestions that were received by the mayor and council and staff to kind of give you an idea of what are certain things that came up for each of the
freeze that we just had here. And so these are some things that just came about just to give you a frame of mind of what could those possibly be. There are 10s or 20s more of each of these. So this is just a very short list that I just snipped together. And a lot of you had the same ideas. And so if someone said it multiple times just in a different way, we kind of summarize that together to get those 65 general ideas to start out with. Any questions on the category grouping together before we move forward?
I would just make a note, thank you, John, that these are just samples, as John said. These were picked just to illustrate potentially eligible items under each of those. So it's illustration only. And then, of course, as John said, there'll be an opportunity to look at the full range of suggestions here as we get into the next steps. Back to you, John.
Real quick, we have an opportunity to see how many times certain items were replicated or suggested.
You will definitely, Amy. Not at this Lunch and Learn.
Okay. Yeah.
But yes, we can show those that had multiple votes and or ideas that were almost identical.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem.
The other task for staff will be indicating which of the submitted projects were not eligible for ARPA funding for one reason or the other. So that'll be, we'll try to show that in the list too.
So now we have made our way up. Our fourth step in this process is to prioritize what you as mayor and council believe are the highest things that staff should look at or you should think about. And so at the end of this short presentation, I have a couple more slides to go. We will actually walk you through an active live polling to come up and say, how do you rank the categories? Which ones would you rate most important and which ones would you rate least important? The hope is to give us a banding to say these are the ones that we would like to deal with first because we think they weight highest, and then work our way through that list 1 through 6. And then that could also set up a discussion for, do you want to then to prioritize and weight funding based on how you rank the categories? Again, trying to give some type of a direction and pathway that you can start to make a decision on. These are projects that we would like to fund, and this is how we could allocate funding to those categories. The fifth step would then be to discuss each category at a council meeting. So take the next 6 upcoming council meetings from April 5th through June 14th and talk about a specific category at each meeting. So if, say, for example, quality of life ranked highest, we would start there and say on the April 5th, we would show you the ideas that came up for that category, how many times there were duplicates or people mentioned the same thing, and then have that a public time that you could openly discuss it and then comment from the public as well. So it's a transparent way to go category by category and have a discussion about each of those projects that could be in that category, and then either flush and vet those or even find new ones. Step 6, then our hope is that by June 28th, we could take all of that information and present a project ranking for you all based on how you would like to divvy up the funding on categories, and then hopefully have a final discussion in council approval. That would then allow us to reach step 7 of our 7-step process, which staff would then assign the projects that you would like to complete and assign staff to help be the champions for those. We would give you quarterly updates, and then that would also allow us to report to the U.S. Treasury each April this is the milestones that we are achieving to make sure that we spend our ARPA funding. It's a really quick overview. I didn't want to talk a lot, but wanted to give council time to discuss this 7-step pathway and to see if, do we need to make modifications? Do we need to tweak stuff? And see if this fits into a framework that we could use to move this forward. Nikki or Curtis or AJ, would you like to add anything?
No, just interested in council feedback now.
Just real quickly, John, and just this is based on our earlier conversations. And again, thank you for the presentation, for the overview both you and Nikki and Curtis have provided. I appreciate that in my absence. Just as a reminder, I think, John, you brought this to our attention that of all the monies that are out there through the ARPA program, less than 10% have been spent or programmed. So if you feel that at some point that you might be a little bit behind or that you might be spinning a bit, there's lots of good company out there. It's just, it's a significant amount of money for almost every community in the United States. And so it's one-time money, as a reminder. So it's a lot of big decisions by councils throughout the United States going on. So I'm sure you'll, as you have any contacts with council members outside, that you're probably going to find that they may be in the same boat that you are, trying to determine how best to utilize these funds for your community.
Thanks, AJ.
I'd say I like this process. I like how it's laid out. I think the important thing is to keep in mind the opportunity and or the innovation that comes from staff who are seeing on the on the front end. I think there's a lot that we can garner and learn, and so I certainly don't want to lose those ideas as we think about our strategic plan, and then really thinking through, what are the projects that align with our strategic plan, and using that as a secondary guiding document as well.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with what Amy said about trying to make sure these align with our strategic plan. I also want to make sure that we have sufficient opportunity for public comment that wouldn't require someone to come to the next 6 council meetings to discuss their comments on each particular category. So I don't know if we have a wrap-up meeting where we review the 6 areas. I don't know, you guys are really smart about stuff like that. So I'll defer to you, but I think it's very important that we have an opportunity for the community to give input before we really commit to anything. I know Des Moines, Polk County, other communities have done series of meetings. I haven't followed it too closely, but I think at least having one meeting, maybe at the end of these 6 council meetings, where we do a summary would be appropriate.
Yeah, we could definitely go ahead and do the 28th wouldn't need to be a decision. The July 1st is a self-imposed deadline, so it could move back to the middle of July if we wanted to, but that's, we could definitely build in that, the 28th would kind of be the wrap-up one where we would go through all 6 of them at the same time.
I've always anticipated that we would have a public input part of the process, so I agree. I think that's very important. We definitely need to have the opportunity for public input. That's the hallmark of what we do in urban development. Certainly any different in this situation.
Well, and for me, it seems like that public input part should occur before we start making decisions as well. I mean, there's no point of public input if the decisions are already made.
And I would add, part of the thought was in breaking these down and making sure that each category was discussed at a meeting. And Councilmember Carberry and Montgomery, I think we can appreciate that people might not want to attend all 6 meetings, but if there's an area that's of particular interest to someone, certainly there would be dedicated time there, and we would make sure in the council recap and in other ways that people knew of that opportunity.
I know we don't have, this wouldn't be like a public hearing, but would there be a way outside of like our public comment period at the beginning of the meeting? I mean, I don't know what your grand vision of how these will incorporate into the meeting, how long you think we'll spend, but where while we're talking about it, but maybe I mean, similar to a public hearing, I guess, where, you know, staff would give an introduction and we could hear from the public related to those ideas. And not, I think would be kind of out of place to put that public comment before they've heard what staff has to say. I know there's a number of people, I mean, not more than I can count on one hand, that have reached out to me that are very, very interested in how we're spending this money and will be at all 6 of these meetings. But I think they need to hear what we're being presented before they have an opportunity to comment. So again, I guess I'd like to see a proposal, maybe taking some of our comments on how these would be incorporated more specifically. I think you're understanding what I'm saying, but I guess before the first meeting, I'd like to see how you're planning on running that part of the meeting. And then, as always, I like to give Derek more work and maybe make sure he can put out a press release outlining the process and how the public can make comments.
Well, and I would just like to add, I just want to make sure that, you know, as the public is providing input on what they would like to see, and if it's not meeting what we can feasibly do under the guidelines of ARPA, that we're clearly articulating why it is that we can't do that. Because I feel like I just don't want to see us get into a situation where somebody proposes something, and even though we may agree that it's a great idea, it's just not something that we can do under the ARPA program, that we also communicate that back to them and why.
I think building on what Bridget had mentioned, we had talked about, again, a dedicated time at a council meeting. And that, if I'm understanding your comments correctly, is that in advance of that, we would advertise that this week we're talking about whatever category, one of the 7 categories, 6 categories, and that here are some suggestions that have been put out there. And so people can get an idea as to what would be considered into that category. And then, I'll make a time available specifically on the agenda that those who wish to come down and present to council can ask questions about or clarifications about those projects. And then, we can also solicit through other venues. Not everybody is going to come down to 6 meetings, as you mentioned. It's just time, energy, and effort, but also other conflicts that they may have. We're getting into the spring and summer season, and so people will be gone and not be able to make all those meetings. So, again, this is new for us, but again, our discussion at the staff level was to, at a council meeting, we're keeping this as transparent as possible. The public is always invited, and get as much notification out there to them to let them know what it is going to be discussed and sample projects.
And I would add, logistically too, this would come right after a citizens forum on your agenda. It would be the first thing. It would be staff introduced, an explanation of the projects in that category, a brief overview, and then discussion and public comment and input. The marketing piece of it would definitely be led by Derek, making sure that people knew that that's what we were to talk about, and then also a web page that would lay out, these are the ideas that came from staff, these are ideas that have come from residents out there, and then break them down into, these are things that can be accomplished, these are things that could be accomplished but don't fit into ARPA funding. You know, making sure that that's out there and transparent and something that we would update after each meeting.
Thank you, John. And also, again, this is, as they say, this is our first rodeo. And so if we have to make adjustments, we certainly can adapt to that. But all of you have been through enough council meetings to know that generating public interest and having them come down and share their thoughts sometimes can be a little challenging. That's why I think we're going to be open to a lot of different venues that will bring in those suggestions.
Any other comments or questions on the process? Okay. John, thank you. John, could you, sorry, maybe might have left that up for one more minute.
Nope, sorry, I thought you were ready to stop sharing to move on to the next part. I will put that back up, Curtis.
Sounds good. If you can back up to step 3, the project categories, so that the council members can see those. Thank you for doing that. One more. Perfect. All right. So council members indicated in the weekly update last Friday that there would be a point in this meeting when we needed you to rank these 6 general categories from first in importance to 6th in importance. And so we'd like to take a minute now, quietly working. If you haven't already categorized the list, we'll give you a minute here with these up to just put a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 next to each item. Please remember that 1 is most important or the highest priority. 6th is your least priority. So we'll score it like golf. A low score is a better score. And we'll take 1 minute here, make sure that everybody has had a chance to categorize their list. Then we'll call on each council member and enter those items into a spreadsheet so that you can see the result.
Curtis, can I ask a question?
Of course.
I'm looking at the strategic plan, and we have it, the language is stormwater management system and projects. Does that fit under enterprise, or is that under roadway and mobility? I'm assuming enterprise.
Right. That, John, you included stormwater in enterprise, correct? Because it's a utility.
That is an enterprise. Yeah, that's water, sewer, stormwater, and broadband.
Okay, perfect. And then Douglas revitalization would fall where?
Roadway and mobility improvements.
It might be helpful to slide to that next slide where you have the examples of what is in each category. That I think will, because it still lists all the categories, but sure, giving you guys an idea of what types of things are we talking about there again. I think that would be helpful.
Thanks, Nick. There's no more questions. We'll give you a minute to make your notes on those.
Was there 6 items or 7? 6.
There are 6 items here. Okay, does anybody need more time? Okay. Then, John, you can stop your share and I'll begin mine.
I'm stopping now.
Good. Okay. Everybody should be able to see a spreadsheet here. Councilmember Blake, we'll begin with you. If you could tell us your first.
Okay. Okay, so you want me to just go by the 6 and then what number goes with each one?
Yeah.
So social and environmental will be 2. Quality of life will be 4. City facilities and services will be 6. Enterprise infrastructure would be 3. Roadway mobility would be 5. And then community contributions would be 1.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Carberry Montgomery.
Okay, I'm going to be a pain here because I based my numbers on the screen that you were just showing that had the
That's okay.
examples.
No
which
problem.
do not align with the numbers.
That's okay. This is random. So your first priority is?
I just wrote the numbers down.
Okay.
City facilities was the first one. City facilities was the first example.
5.
Okay.
The next was
Teamwork.
community contributions.
1.
The third was enterprise infrastructure.
6.
The next was quality of life amenities.
2.
Then followed by roadway improvements and mobility.
4.
And by deduction, social and environmental programs.
3.
Excellent.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Thank you both. And Councilmember Kroll.
All right. I tried to look at the strategic plan, but it's not exactly a 1-to-1. So let's see, my number, social and environmental programs is a 3. Quality of life is a 5. City facilities is a 6. Enterprise infrastructure is a 1. Roadway and mobility is a 4. And community contributions is a 2.
Thank you. Is that accurate? Okay. Councilmember McBurney.
I'll just go ahead and do it in order that you have it. So 1 for social and environmental, 5 for quality of life, 6 for city facilities, 3 for enterprise infrastructure, 4 for roadway and mobility improvements, and then 2 for community contributions.
Thank you. And Councilmember Obrecht.
So social 6, quality of life 1, city 5, enterprise 4, roadway 3, and community 2.
Okay, so golf here, a low score is a higher priority. So the highest priority is community contributions, followed by social and environmental programs with even scores for quality of life and enterprise infrastructure, and roadway and mobility being the fourth, and city facilities and services being the fifth. So in looking at that list, this would give some sense of how to look at the $6.6 million in funding that we have. And you see city facilities and services, for example, is a distant last place. There may be some options that staff could look at for weighting the funding toward different areas. Would it be, one question is observations or feedback on this exercise and what you see in the categories? And then would it be helpful if staff produced some options for how you could consider allocation of the funding within the categories?
Hey, Curtis, this is that. I guess when I look at the list, I would almost drop city facilities off of our 6 priorities, how low it got ranked.
Sure.
And then, yeah, do some sort of allocation of capital across the other 5 categories. That's weighted based off of voting.
Sure.
I don't think we should be allocating money across the programs until we have an idea of what we're actually talking about.
Oh, certainly. Yes. It would simply be to present some options for how you could think of general ways to, not to assign specific dollar amounts. Certainly there will be some fungibility in the projects, but to at least get a sense of what relative rankings of priority would mean for dividing up that money.
Thank you.
Okay. I think that gives us some good direction, at least initial direction on what our group priorities are.
So what are the next steps?
So one question then would be to ensure that there is, I'll stop sharing here. I think we've received a lot of feedback about how to prepare for a next meeting when we would look at each of the individual categories, getting the word out. The next step would be for staff to prepare some options for the council to consider in terms of how to allocate the funding, and then looking at the list of projects, assigning them to each of the categories, and then preparing for the council meeting on April 5th, when we would begin the process. Are there other questions or concerns from the council?
Any other thoughts?
What's the time frame for us to receive the comprehensive list and the number of repeat items?
I would, I'll speak and ask my colleagues to respond, especially you, AJ, but I think that that information would be prepared as we begin the process on the 5th.
Yeah.
That is my anticipation. It's easy for me to say because I'm 2 time zones away, and won't be back into the office till Saturday. But no, yeah, I think that's reasonable for us to get accomplished.
So get that circulated along with the other items for the meeting.
Yeah, we've collected that information already. Now that we know how you prioritize the categories, it'll be easy for us to do that. And again, just kind of a repeat, I think this got to Larry's question about making sure that if someone submits something from the public that is so far out of bounds that it doesn't qualify, that we have to make sure that we provide that background or at least that rationale. And we've done that internally. We've done the scrub internally for our city projects, our city staff-based projects. When someone came in and said, I think we ought to be doing something really grand and fabulous, it fell well beyond the parameters. We certainly scrubbed that out. We're just not going to take that opportunity to spend a lot of time on things that clearly don't qualify, and that was our staff approach.
And just to be clear, the expectation is that we're going to go through all 6 or 5, depending on, and it doesn't matter if we find something that's awesome and it's $6 million, we will still go through each presentation and just not stop once the money in theory is spent, but we will go through all of it to see if there's alternatives.
That's the expectation, because again, it gets to a point of, as you prioritize these categorizations, is that we'll be pushing that out. At the same time, you don't want to, from the staff perspective, we were thinking from the perspective of community input and transparency, that you wanted to give each category its opportunity for the public to comment on. It's obviously that there's going to be individuals in the community, there's going to be ideas and suggestions that garner more support than others, but certainly is, from the initial get-go when the monies were announced, there was always a concern or at least a suggestion that, we try to generate as much interest as possible, that every voice be given a chance to be heard.
Okay. Any other thoughts or questions? Everybody clear on where we're headed right now, at least on the process? All right, good discussion. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to staff. Thanks to the council for their input. Anything further for the good of the order today? If not, is there a motion second to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn.
Okay. For a second.
Second, Bridget.
Bridget, all in favor? Okay.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you very much.